Slave to your own rage. You're already in motion. You took the first step. You stopped planning and started building. But there's something nobody warned you about: action. That the most powerful engine in the world is useless if the driver is drunk, and you're drunk. Drunk on emotions you don't control, on reactions you don't choose, on impulses that govern every important decision in your life without you ever giving them permission. In the last episode, you did something most people never do. You acted. You stopped planning. You stopped preparing. You stopped consuming content as a substitute for living, and you took the step. Imperfect, clumsy, scared, but real. You laid the first brick on the empty lot left behind when you said goodbye to your old self, and that was extraordinary. But now that you're in motion, now that your hands are dirty and your plans are crashing into reality the way all plans crash when they leave the notebook and enter the world, something is happening that you need to understand before it destroys what you've barely started to build. You're reacting, not responding. Reacting. There's a massive difference between those two words, and that difference is the subject of this entire episode. But for now, I need you to understand this. You're in action, yes, but that action is being driven by your emotions, not by your reason. You're acting from impulse, not from decision. You're moving, but the one holding the wheel isn't you. It's your automatic reactions. Your anger when something doesn't go the way you expected. Your anxiety when uncertainty shows up. Your frustration when results don't come as fast as your impatience demands. Your wounded ego when someone questions what you're doing. All those emotions are there. They were always there. But when you were standing still, when you were sitting around planning without acting, those emotions had no serious consequences because there was no action for them to influence. They were like a drunk driver sitting in a parked car. Dangerous in theory, but harmless in practice, because the car wasn't moving. Now the car is moving. Now you're on the road. Now every turn of the wheel has real consequences. And the driver behind that wheel, your unmastered emotions, is making decisions that can slam you into the first wall that crosses your path. Anger makes you say things you can't take back, words that leave your mouth like bullets and hit the people who matter most to you with a destructive precision you would never have if you were thinking clearly. Anxiety makes you abandon projects before they have time to work, convincing you that everything is going to fail with a certainty that feels absolute but is pure emotional fiction. Frustration makes you sabotage what you're building because the results aren't immediate, because your impatience demands instant harvests from seeds you barely planted yesterday. Fear makes you pull back right when you need to push forward, right at the moment where one more step would have taken you to the other side. And wounded pride makes you fight battles that aren't worth fighting, pouring obscene amounts of emotional energy into proving you're right when what you should be doing is building your life. Each of those emotions, acting unsupervised, is a wrecking ball working against everything you're trying to build. It's like hiring someone to build your house during the day and someone else to tear it down at night. The net result is zero. Or worse than zero, because on top of the wasted work, there's the toll of building and destroying and building and destroying in a cycle that exhausts even the toughest among us. This is the problem the Stoics identified over 2,000 years ago as the central problem of human existence. Not external suffering, not harsh circumstances, not enemies, not bad luck. The central problem is the lack of mastery over your own interior, the inability to govern what happens inside you, the invisible slavery to emotions you didn't choose, that you don't control, and that are making decisions on your behalf without your consent. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the known world, wrote that the most important battle of his life wasn't against the barbarians threatening the borders of the empire. It was against his own thoughts, against his own emotions, against the anger he felt when he was betrayed, against the frustration he felt when his plans didn't work, against the emotional exhaustion of carrying the weight of millions of lives without being allowed to show weakness. That was his real war. And it was a war he fought every day, every night, every moment of his existence as emperor. Seneca, the wealthiest man in Rome, wrote an entire treatise on anger, not because it was an interesting academic topic, because anger had destroyed lives around him. He had watched emperors make catastrophic decisions in moments of fury. He had watched intelligent men destroy everything they had built with a single uncontrolled reaction. He had seen, time and again, how unchecked emotion was more destructive than any enemy army. Epictetus, the man who was a slave and who conquered his inner freedom before conquering his outer freedom, taught that true freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. It's the ability to choose how you respond to what happens to you. It's the capacity to put a space between the stimulus and the response, between what happens out there and what you decide to do in here. That space, that small interval between the event and your reaction, is where your humanity lives. It's where your freedom lives. It's where the difference lives between an animal that reacts by instinct and a human being that responds by choice. And you don't have that space, or you have it so compressed, so microscopic, so crushed by years of automatic reactivity that it's practically non-existent. Something happens and you react. No pause, no filter, not a single second of deliberation. Someone says something and you explode. A situation changes and you crumble. A plan fails and you spiral into frustration until you're paralyzed. Someone looks at you a certain way and your mood shifts for the rest of the day. An unexpected piece of news and you lose the ability to think clearly for hours. There's no pause between what happens to you and what you do with what happens to you. It's automatic. It's instant. It's like an electrical circuit where the stimulus and the response are connected by a direct wire, with no switch, no regulator, nothing that lets you decide whether you want to turn that light on or not. And as long as that direct circuit runs your actions, as long as there's no switch between what you feel and what you do, everything you're building is in permanent danger. Because it doesn't matter how many bricks you lay, if every time an emotion hits you, you tear down the wall you just built with your own hands. Welcome to episode 7 of From Lost to Unstoppable. This is Stoicism for Winners, and this is the episode where you learn to take the wheel of your own life, not the wheel of your circumstances that was never in your hands and never will be, the wheel of yourself, of your responses, of your decisions, of what you do with what you feel. That wheel is yours. It was always yours, but you never grabbed it because nobody taught you it existed. If this episode gives you the control you never had over your inner world, drop this phrase in the comments. Today I stop reacting and start responding. Today you're going to learn the most important skill the Stoics ever taught. More important than the acceptance we worked on in episode 1. More important than the self-knowledge of episode 4. More important than the action of episode 6. The skill of governing your interior, so your interior stops governing you. The skill of putting a space where today there's a direct wire. The skill of turning automatic reactions into chosen responses. The skill that separates people who build something lasting from people who build and destroy in an endless cycle of uncontrolled impulse. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, the place inside you that is untouchable, that no external circumstance can reach, that no provocation can breach, that no runaway emotion can bring down, a place of calm at the center of the storm, a place of clarity in the middle of chaos, a place from which you can observe what you feel without being dragged by what you feel. That place exists inside you. It always existed. But you've lived your entire life outside of it, exposed to the emotional elements, shaken by every wind that blows, drowned by every wave that breaks. Today, we start building the walls of that citadel, brick by brick, lesson by lesson. First Stoic lesson: you are not your emotions. You are the one who decides what to do with them. But you've spent your whole life confusing feeling with obeying. There's a confusion at the root of nearly all the suffering you've ever experienced. A confusion nobody pointed out to you, nobody explained to you. That probably nobody around you understands either, because it's a cultural, generational, almost universal confusion. A confusion so deeply embedded in the way you see the world that you treat it as undeniable fact, when in reality it's a fundamental programming error. The confusion is this: you believe your emotions are you. You believe that when you feel anger, you are an angry person, and that the anger defines who you are in that moment. You believe that when you feel fear, you are a coward, and that the fear dictates what you can and cannot do. You believe that when you feel sadness, you are a defeated person, and that the sadness determines how your day should go. You believe that when you feel an urge, you have to act on it, because suppressing an urge is not being authentic. You believe your emotions are your deepest truth, and that obeying them is being true to yourself. That belief has wrecked you more times than you can count. Because if your emotions are you, if the anger you feel is who you are in that moment, then you have no choice. You have to obey. You have to scream when you feel like screaming. You have to hit when you feel like hitting. You have to run when you feel like running. You have to quit when you feel like quitting. You have to destroy when you feel like destroying. Because if the emotion is you, resisting it would be resisting yourself. And nobody wants to resist themselves. Nobody wants to be inauthentic. But emotions are not you. They're something that happens to you, like rain, like wind, like a headache. They're internal events that occur inside your body and your mind as a response to stimuli. Some of those stimuli are external. Someone says something, something goes wrong, a situation shifts. Others are internal. A memory surfaces, a thought forms, an interpretation generates itself automatically. In every case, the emotion is a response, a reflex, a signal. It is not an order. It is not a command. It is not an instruction you must obey under penalty of betraying your authenticity. The difference between feeling and obeying is the difference between receiving advice and following it blindly. When someone gives you advice, you listen, you consider it, you weigh it, and then you decide whether to follow it or not. You don't automatically obey every piece of advice you receive. That would be absurd. That would be handing your decision-making over to anyone who talks to you. But that's exactly what you do with your emotions. Every emotion that shows up, you obey it. No filter, no evaluation. Not the slightest question about whether that emotion is giving you useful information or leading you straight into disaster. The Stoics were the first to articulate this distinction with the clarity it deserves. Epictetus put it in terms so simple: there's no excuse for not understanding. Impressions come to you, but the assent is yours. The impression is the emotion, the automatic thought, the initial reaction that appears without you choosing it. You don't control that. That's biology. That's your nervous system doing its job. What you do control is the assent. The decision to accept that impression as truth and act accordingly, or to observe it, evaluate it, and consciously decide what to do with it. When someone insults you, the impression arrives. Rage, heat in your chest, tension in your jaw. The urge to fire back with something hurtful, that's automatic. You didn't choose it. It showed up. The same way hunger shows up when you don't eat. The same way cold shows up when the temperature drops. It's information your nervous system is giving you about what just happened. Up to that point, there's no problem. The problem starts when you give your assent to that impression without examining it. When the rage shows up, and you, without pause, without filter, without a single second of deliberation, decide that the rage is right and that you must act on it, that you must return the insult, that you must escalate the conflict, that you must defend your honor with a reaction that, 3 hours later, when the rage has faded, is going to leave you ashamed, regretful, wondering why you said that, why you did that, why you let a 30-second emotion wreck a 30-year relationship. That's confusing feeling with obeying. And you do it constantly. You do it when you feel anxiety and cancel the plan. You do it when you feel frustration and abandon the project. You do it when you feel insecurity and stay silent in the meeting. You do it when you feel the urge to spend and max out the credit card. You do it when you feel attraction and betray a commitment. You do it when you feel laziness and don't get out of bed even though you know today matters. In every single one of those cases, an emotion showed up and you obeyed it like it was a direct order from a superior you're not allowed to question. But it's not a superior, it's a signal, it's a data point. It's information you can use or discard based on your rational judgment, the same way a ship captain uses radar and weather data without blindly obeying what they say. The radar says, "There's a storm ahead." The captain doesn't abandon the voyage automatically. He assesses the intensity, assesses the alternatives, assesses whether he can navigate around it, and decides. The radar informs, the captain decides. Your emotions are the radar, you are the captain, and you've spent your entire life letting the radar steer the ship. Anger tells you something happened that you interpret as an injustice. Fine. Information received, data point logged. Now, you decide whether that interpretation is correct and whether the action anger is suggesting, which is almost always some form of attack or destruction, is truly the best possible response given the circumstances. Anxiety tells you there's uncertainty about the future, and it could be dangerous. Fine. Information received. Now you decide whether that uncertainty justifies abandoning your plans or whether you can move forward accepting that uncertainty is an inevitable, inescapable part of being alive and of attempting anything worth doing. Fear tells you there's a potential risk ahead. Fine. Information received. Now, you decide whether that risk is real and significant or whether your mind is blowing it out of proportion, the same way it's blown every risk out of proportion since you were a kid who was afraid of the dark. In every case, the emotion provides data. You provide the decision. The emotion informs. You govern. That is the correct relationship between you and your emotions. Not the relationship you've had until now, where the emotion governs and you obey, and then wonder why your life is a reactive mess. Marcus Aurelius practiced this distinction every day of his life. He felt anger when he was betrayed. He felt frustration when his plans failed. He felt fear when the news from the front was bad. But he didn't obey those emotions automatically. He observed them. He examined them. He used them as information to make wiser decisions. He didn't follow them blindly. He processed them. And then he acted from reason, not from emotion. Not because emotion was bad, because emotion alone, without the filter of reason, is a terrible guide for making decisions that affect your life and the lives of those around you. Your assignment for this lesson is to start practicing the distinction between feeling and obeying. For the next 3 days, Every time you feel an intense emotion, any emotion, anger, fear, anxiety, frustration, sadness, impulse, I want you to do something before you act on it. I want you to name it silently. I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling the urge to do something. That simple act, almost ridiculously simple, of naming the emotion in silence creates a microscopic but real distance between you and it. You are no longer the anger. You are someone who is feeling anger. You are no longer the anxiety. You are someone who is observing anxiety inside yourself. You are no longer the impulse. You are someone who notices an impulse and can choose whether to let it through or not. That shift in perspective, which seems so insignificant your mind is going to want to dismiss it as useless, is actually the first step toward inner mastery. Because the moment you can observe an emotion, you are no longer completely inside it. There's a part of you that's outside, watching, evaluating, deciding. And that part that observes without being swept away, is you, not the emotion. You, the captain, not the radar. Second Stoic lesson. You react to everything as if it were an emergency and then wonder why you're exhausted and why your relationships are in ruins. Your nervous system has two main operating modes. The first is emergency mode. It activates when there's a real and immediate threat. A car coming straight at you, a dangerous animal, a fire. In that mode, your body floods with adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart races, your muscles tense, your vision narrows. Your capacity for complex thought shuts down because you don't need to think, you need to react. Fight or flight. It's a brilliant biological response that has kept the human species alive for hundreds of thousands of years. It works perfectly for what it was designed for, real life or death emergencies. The second mode is normal operating mode. It activates when there's no immediate threat. In this mode, your body is relaxed. Your mind can think clearly. You can evaluate situations with nuance. You can consider long-term consequences. You can communicate with empathy and precision. You can make complex decisions that account for multiple variables. This is the mode you should be in most of the time. The mode from which lives are built, relationships are built, projects are built, careers are built. Everything that matters gets built in normal mode, not in emergency mode. Your problem is that you live in permanent emergency mode. Not because your life is full of real emergencies. Because your nervous system can no longer tell the difference between a real emergency and an ordinary inconvenience. Your boss sends a curt email and your body reacts as if a lion were chasing you. Your partner makes a comment you don't like and your nervous system fires up as if your survival were at stake. Someone cuts you off in traffic and your physiological response is the same as if you were being attacked by a predator. A client cancels a contract and your body goes into war mode as if your entire existence depended on that one contract. Everything is an emergency. Everything is urgent. Everything triggers the same high-intensity response that should be reserved for situations where your life is genuinely in danger. And the result of living like this, of being in emergency mode from the moment you wake up until you go to sleep, is devastating on multiple levels. You need to understand clearly. First level, physical exhaustion. Your body was not designed to stay in emergency mode around the clock. The adrenaline and cortisol released with every disproportionate reaction carry an enormous biological cost. Your cardiovascular system wears down. Your immune system weakens. Your digestion falls apart. Your sleep is destroyed because your body can't rest when it believes it's under permanent attack. The fatigue you feel isn't because you work too much. It's because you react too much. Your body is exhausted from fighting battles that don't exist, from fleeing threats that aren't real, from maintaining a state of maximum alert in situations that only called for a calm and measured response. Second level, the destruction of relationships. People who live in permanent emergency mode are impossible to be around for long. They're walking emotional bombs that can go off from the most trivial trigger, because everything turns into drama. A casual observation turns into a fight. A misunderstanding turns into a relationship crisis. A difference of opinion turns into a war where someone has to win and someone has to lose. A slightly unexpected tone of voice turns into evidence of contempt, of disrespect, of proof that the other person doesn't value you. The people around you start walking on eggshells because they never know what's going to set off the next explosion. Your partner stops telling you what they really think because every time they do, every time they dare to be honest with you, your reaction is so disproportionate, so intense, so draining, that the emotional cost of honesty isn't worth it. So they go quiet. And the silence you interpret as peace is actually distance. It's the distance of someone who learned they can't be real with you because your emergency mode punishes reality. Your kids learn to avoid you when you're in a mood. Your friends drift away gradually. Your co-workers tolerate you but don't respect you because they know that at any moment you could blow up over something that any normal person would treat as a minor setback. And you wonder why you feel alone, why nobody understands you, why your relationships always end in conflict, without realizing that the reason is your inability to respond proportionally to what happens. To give a level 3 response to a level 3 problem instead of giving a level 10 response to everything. Third level, destructive decisions. The worst decisions of your life, the ones that cost you the most, the ones that caused the most damage, the ones that generated the most regret, were made in emergency mode. They were made when your nervous system was maxed out, when your capacity for rational thought was shut off, when your vision had narrowed to the point where you couldn't see past the immediate impulse. Quitting a job in a fit of frustration, saying something unforgivable in the middle of a fight, making an impulsive financial decision driven by fear or rage, ending a relationship in a moment of anger that didn't represent what you actually felt. Every single one of those decisions was the direct result of treating a normal situation like an emergency. The Stoics diagnosed this problem with a precision that modern neuroscience is only now confirming. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the need to measure the response to the stimulus, to not give things more importance than they deserve, to ask yourself, in the face of every situation that triggers an emotional reaction, is this really what I think it is? Does it deserve this response? Or am I reacting to my interpretation of the event and not the event itself? That last question is the key to everything, because you don't react to what happens, you react to your interpretation of what happens. And your interpretation, when you live in emergency mode, is always catastrophic. It always assumes the worst. It always turns a comment into an attack, a difficulty into a disaster, a setback into an existential crisis. Your interpretation system is calibrated for catastrophe. And as long as it stays calibrated that way, every event, no matter how mundane, is going to trigger the emergency response, and you're going to keep living exhausted, with broken relationships, and with a track record of decisions made in the worst possible mental state. Seneca described people in his time who flew into a rage because their food was cold, who caused public scenes because a servant had made a minor mistake, who destroyed friendships over trivial disagreements. He observed them with the eye of a doctor diagnosing a disease. These people don't have a problem with their circumstances, they have a problem with reactivity. Their response system is out of proportion, and that disproportion costs them everything they value, while they remain convinced that the problem is the world around them, not the way they react to the world. You are that person. Not because you're a bad person, because nobody taught you to calibrate your responses. Nobody taught you that you can feel the emotion without the emotion dictating the intensity of your response. That you can be upset without screaming, frustrated without quitting, anxious without freezing, hurt without attacking. That there's an entire range of responses between feeling nothing and exploding, and that most situations in your life call for responses in the middle of that range, not at the extremes. Your assignment for this lesson is to start calibrating your responses. For the next 3 days, every time you feel your body shifting into emergency mode, before you react, ask yourself one question. On a scale of 1 to 10, what level of emergency is this really? A 10 means your life is in immediate danger. A 1 is a minor inconvenience. Most of the things that trigger your emergency mode are a 3 or a 4, but you're giving them an 8 or a 9. Your boss's email is a 3, your response is an 8. Your partner's comment is a 2, your response is a 7. Traffic is a 1, your response is a 6. When you see the disproportion written in numbers, when you see that you're giving level 8 responses to level 3 situations, the absurdity becomes visible. And what's visible can be changed. What's invisible controls you. What's visible, you control. Third Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth, and his greatest daily battle was against his own thoughts, not against his enemies. Picture for a moment the life of Marcus Aurelius, not the romantic version from the history books, the real version, the version of a man who woke up every morning knowing that the decisions he would make that day would affect the lives of millions. That every mistake he made could cost thousands of lives. That every moment of weakness would be exploited by enemies, both inside and outside the empire, who were waiting for exactly that to advance their own agendas. That he couldn't have a bad day. That he couldn't afford a single uncontrolled emotional reaction, because the consequences of that reaction wouldn't be a fight with his partner or a regrettable comment. They would be military orders that moved legions. They would be death sentences. They would be policies affecting entire provinces. With that level of pressure, with that magnitude of consequences, who do you think Marcus Aurelius was fighting every single day? Not the barbarians at the border. He had generals for that. Not the conspiring senators. He had advisors for that. Not the diseases ravaging the empire. He had physicians for that. He was fighting himself against the anger he felt when he discovered someone close had betrayed him, against the impulse to punish excessively those who had wronged him, against the frustration of watching his best plans fail because of circumstances beyond his control, against the bitterness of sacrificing his personal life for an empire that often didn't appreciate the sacrifice, against the emotional exhaustion of carrying responsibilities no human being should carry alone, against the temptation to use his absolute power to satisfy momentary impulses the way so many emperors before him had done. That was his real war, and he fought it every night in his meditations. Every entry in that private journal is a round of that fight, a round against a thought that was pulling him in the wrong direction, a round against an emotion threatening to take control of his decisions, a round against the part of himself that wanted to react instead of respond. Read the meditations carefully, and what you'll find is not abstract philosophy. It's a man wrestling his own inner demons in real time, writing to keep from losing control, writing to remind himself of the principles that kept him sane, writing to create that space between stimulus and response that Epictetus taught, and that every day, under the pressure of empire, compressed until it nearly disappeared. He would tell himself, At dawn, when you have trouble getting up, tell yourself, I am rising to do the work of a human being. Not because he had energy to spare, because he didn't want to get up, because he was exhausted, because his body and his mind were begging him to stay in bed one more day, one day without impossible decisions, one day without the weight of the world. And in that moment, in that battle between the impulse to stay and the responsibility to act, Marcus Aurelius was practicing inner mastery. He didn't obey the exhaustion. He felt it, he acknowledged it, and he acted in spite of it. He would tell himself, someone offended me? That's their problem. What matters is how I respond. That line is inner mastery distilled into a single sentence. It doesn't deny the offense. It doesn't minimize what happened. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't hurt. But it redirects attention from the external event which he can't control toward his internal response which he can. It's the dichotomy of control applied to emotion in real time. And Marcus Aurelius needed to apply it every single day, because every single day someone offended him, betrayed him, frustrated him, challenged him, not once a year, every day. And every day he had to choose between reacting from emotion or responding from reason. He wrote himself reminders about the temporary nature of all things, about how the people who provoked him were also mortal, also suffered, also fought against their own emotions, not to excuse them, to keep their actions from having more power over his internal state than they deserved, to remind himself that reacting with fury to the pettiness of another human being was giving that person a control over his interior that they hadn't earned and didn't deserve. And here's the paradox you need to absorb until it changes the way you see your own life. The most powerful man in the known world, the man who could execute anyone who offended him with a gesture, the man who could wipe entire cities off the map with a single order, the man who had more external power than any other human being of his era, and possibly in all of history up to that point, considered that the hardest and most important battle of his existence was not any of the wars he waged at the frontiers. It was the internal battle, the battle against his own thoughts, against his own emotions, against the automatic reactivity that threatened every day to turn him into a tyrant, like those who came before him, into a slave of his impulses, sitting on the throne of the freest man in the world. That should stop you cold. The man who could do anything chose as his priority learning not to do certain things. The man with unlimited external power dedicated his life to conquering power over his interior, because he understood, with the clarity you need to absorb right now, that all the power in the world is useless if you can't govern yourself, that the emperor who cannot control his anger is more of a slave than the slave who can control his. If Marcus Aurelius, with all that power, with all that ability to impose his will without consequence, chose not to react from emotion, what excuse do you have? You, who don't have legions awaiting your orders. You, who can't execute anyone with a gesture. You, whose consequences for emotional meltdowns are fighting with your partner, losing a client, saying something regrettable in a meeting. If the man who ruled the world could put a pause between the stimulus and the response, so can you. The difference isn't ability, it's practice. Marcus Aurelius practiced inner mastery every day for decades. You haven't practiced it for a single day of your life. Think about the people who hurt Marcus Aurelius the most, the generals who betrayed him, the advisors who conspired against him, the supposed allies who stabbed him in the back. If Marcus Aurelius had reacted from emotion with every single one of them, if he had obeyed the immediate impulse of anger and pain, the history of the Roman Empire would have been a history of disproportionate vengeance, of bloody purges, of an emperor who used his power to satisfy momentary emotional impulses. That is exactly what emperors like Nero, Caligula, and Domitian did. They reacted. They didn't respond. And history remembers them as monsters. Not because they were more evil than others, because they let their emotions govern their decisions without the filter of reason. Marcus Aurelius chose differently. He chose to respond. He chose the pause. He chose the space between what he felt and what he did. And history remembers him as one of the wisest and most just rulers who ever lived. Not because he didn't feel anger, because he didn't obey the anger. Not because he didn't feel frustration, because he didn't let frustration dictate his orders. Not because he was immune to emotional pain, because he used that pain as information to make better decisions instead of letting it become the fuel for destructive ones. Your assignment for this lesson is to adopt a practice Marcus Aurelius used that you can apply directly to your life. Every night, before you go to sleep, you're going to write down 3 things in a notebook or on your phone. First, one moment during the day where you reacted from emotion. No judgment, no self-punishment, just identify it. Today I reacted with anger when my kids spilled something on the table. Second, what the person you're becoming would have done in that same situation. The person I'm building would have taken a breath, cleaned up the mess, and used the moment to teach something calmly. Third, what you're going to do tomorrow when a similar situation comes up. Not a vague intention, a concrete action. Tomorrow, when something triggers my anger, I'm going to count to 5 before I open my mouth. This exercise is exactly what Marcus Aurelius did every night in his meditations. He reviewed, he evaluated, and he prepared for the next day. Not with the expectation of perfection, with the intention to improve by 1 degree, a single degree, every night, 1 more degree of mastery, every day, 1 fewer automatic reaction. That's how the inner citadel is built. Not all at once, brick by brick, night by night. 4th Stoic lesson. Anger makes you feel powerful, but turns you into a slave of anyone who knows how to push your buttons. Let's talk about anger. Not in the abstract, not as a philosophical concept. Your anger. The anger you feel when someone disrespects you. The anger you feel when things don't go the way you expected. The anger you feel when you're lied to. The anger you feel when someone crosses a line you consider sacred. That anger that rises through your chest like a hot wave, that clenches your jaw, that tightens your fists, that changes your voice, that darkens your vision, that turns the rational being you are into something you barely recognize once the storm passes. That anger feels good. That's what nobody wants to admit. Anger feels powerful. It feels like strength, like energy, like you're finally taking control. When anger floods through you, you don't feel weak. You don't feel vulnerable. You feel enormous. You feel capable of anything. You feel justified in whatever you're about to do next, because the intensity of what you feel seems to validate the intensity of your response. But that feeling of power is the biggest lie your emotions ever tell you. Anger doesn't give you power. It takes it away. Every time someone says something and you explode, you just showed that person they have a button they can press whenever they want to make you lose control. You just handed them a remote control with your name on it that lets them alter your internal state with a single word, a single gesture, a single look. You just told them, "You decide how I feel. You decide how I behave. You have more power over my emotional state than I do." Is that power? Is that strength? Being the emotional puppet of anyone who knows which string to pull. Think about the person who provokes you the most. The one who knows exactly what to say to set you off. The one who knows your buttons and presses them with surgical precision. Every time that person provokes you and you react, they win. It doesn't matter who yells louder. It doesn't matter who gets the last word. It doesn't matter who wins the argument. They win because they achieved what they set out to do. Control your internal state. They knocked you off center. They made you lose your composure. They turned you into a version of yourself you didn't choose to be, and all it cost them was a sentence, a look, a tone of voice. That's all it takes to make you their temporary slave. And you, feeling so powerful in the middle of your rage, don't even realize you're the person with the least power in that interaction. Seneca understood this with a depth few have ever reached. He wrote an entire treatise on anger called De Ira that he dedicated to his brother Novatus. And in that treatise he says something that should shatter the pride you have in your anger. That anger is the ugliest and the most savage of all the passions. That it distorts the face, that it disfigures the mind, that it is a temporary madness that, while it lasts, turns the wisest man into an animal that cannot see past its own destructive impulse. Seneca wasn't speaking from theory. He had watched anger destroy the most powerful men in Rome. He had watched Nero, the emperor he served as advisor, transform from a promising young man into an impulsive monster who murdered on a whim, who destroyed out of rage, who made catastrophic decisions because a momentary emotion seemed more important than reason. He had seen how uncontrolled anger turned men with all the power in the world into slaves of their own impulses. Slaves who, ironically, felt powerful while the anger controlled them. And Seneca observed something else that applies directly to your life. He observed that anger never delivers the results it promises. Anger promises you justice. It promises that if you explode, if you scream, if you impose your emotional force, the other person is going to understand, is going to change, is going to respect your boundaries. But what anger actually produces is fear, not respect, distance, not understanding, silence, not agreement. People don't change because you screamed at them. They go quiet, they pull away. They fear you, but they don't respect you. And the difference between fear and respect is the difference between a relationship built on intimidation and a relationship built on trust. Anger destroys trust. Always, without exception. How many times has your anger produced the result you were looking for? Think about it seriously. How many times did you scream and the other person said, "You're right, I'll change," with genuine sincerity? How many times did your emotional explosion solve the actual problem instead of creating 3 new ones on top of the original? How many times did anger bring you closer to what you wanted instead of pushing you further away? If you're honest, brutally honest with yourself, the answer is almost never. Maybe never. Anger doesn't solve, it complicates. Anger doesn't build, it destroys. Anger doesn't give you what you want. It pushes you away from what you want while making you feel like you're fighting heroically for it. It's the most deceptive emotion there is because it disguises itself as an ally while actively working against you. Think about the times you lost control, not in the abstract, in specific situations you can remember right now. That fight where you said something you couldn't take back. That moment where your anger made someone who mattered to you look at you with fear instead of love. That impulsive decision you made in a state of fury that cost you months or years to repair. That relationship that fractured not because of the original problem, but because of your disproportionate reaction to the problem. In every single one of those cases, anger promised you power and delivered destruction. It promised you justice and delivered remorse. It promised you were defending yourself, and in reality, you were attacking yourself. There's a crucial difference you need to understand. The difference between anger and firmness. Firmness is communicating a boundary with clarity, with calm, with the quiet strength of someone who knows what they want and doesn't need to shout to get it. Anger is losing emotional control and confusing that loss of control with strength. Firmness says, "This is not acceptable, and these are the consequences," in a tone that leaves no room for doubt but doesn't need to raise its voice. Anger says the same thing but screaming, shaking, face contorted, with words that go beyond what the situation warrants, causing collateral damage that's going to take you weeks or months to repair. The truly strong person is not the one who explodes. It's the one who can feel the anger rising through their chest and choose not to obey it. The one who can be on the edge of detonation and, instead of blowing up, channel that energy into communicating with a firmness that is infinitely more effective and more respected than any scream. That's what Marcus Aurelius did. That's what Seneca preached. That's what Epictetus taught. Not the absence of anger, the conscious choice not to obey it. Epictetus put it in terms that leave no room for ambiguity. Anyone can get angry, that's easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. The key is to the right degree, not eliminating anger, calibrating it, giving it the proportion the situation deserves, using it as controlled fuel for a measured response, instead of letting it be an uncontrolled explosion that levels everything it touches. Your assignment for this lesson is to identify your primary trigger, the person or situation that most consistently activates your anger. That person or situation has your remote control, and today you start taking it back. Write 3 things. First, what exactly does that person or situation say or do to activate your anger? Be specific, not, "They disrespect me." What do they do exactly? What do they say? What tone do they use? What gesture do they make? Second, what is your current automatic reaction? What you do when that button gets pushed? Yell, insult, shut down, storm out, and slam the door. Make cutting remarks. Write what you actually do, not what you wish you did. Third, what response would the person you're building choose? Not a passive response, not swallowing it and staying quiet. A firm, calibrated, proportional response. A response that communicates your boundary without handing your emotional control to whoever is provoking you. The next time that person or situation shows up, and it will, you're going to have those 3 things written down. You're going to know what triggers your anger. You're going to know your automatic pattern. And you're going to have an alternative ready, not improvised, in the heat of anger, when your ability to think is shut off, prepared in advance. Like an emergency plan you write when you're calm, to use when the storm hits, because the storm always comes. The question is whether you'll be ready or whether you'll let it drag you under again. 5th Stoic lesson. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there is a space, and in that space lives your freedom or your prison. This lesson contains the single most important idea in all of Stoicism. Not one of the most important, the most important. The idea upon which everything else rests. Acceptance, self-knowledge, action, emotional control, all of it springs from this central truth. If you understand this, you understand Stoicism. If you don't, everything else is intellectual decoration. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there is a space that might last a second, or a millisecond, or a minute, a space that can be so small you don't even know it exists, or so wide you can walk around inside it, look around, evaluate your options, and consciously choose the best response. The size of that space doesn't depend on circumstances, It depends on you, on how much you've cultivated it, on how much you've practiced it, on how much awareness you've developed about its existence. For most people, that space doesn't exist. The stimulus and the response are fused, welded, melted together. Someone says something, and the reaction is instant. There is no interval. There is no pause. There is no moment of evaluation. It's a closed circuit where the external event automatically produces a behavior the person never chose, like an animal reacting on instinct, like a machine executing its programming. No awareness, no choice, no freedom. And that absence of space is the exact definition of emotional prison. When there's no space between the stimulus and the response, you are not free. You are a prisoner of your automatic reactions. It doesn't matter if you live in a mansion or a cramped apartment. It doesn't matter if you have money or not. It doesn't matter if you have power or not. If any external stimulus can automatically determine your internal state and your behavior, you are a slave. A sophisticated slave, well-dressed and well-intentioned, but a slave all the same. Epictetus, who was a literal slave before he was a philosopher, understood better than anyone in the history of humanity the difference between external slavery and internal slavery. As a slave, his body didn't belong to him. Another man decided where he slept, what he ate, what he did every hour of the day. His master could beat him. His master broke his leg. He had no freedom over anything that could be seen from the outside. He was, by every legal and social definition, the property of another human being. But Epictetus discovered something in the middle of that slavery that changed not only his life, but the history of human thought. He discovered that even though his body was chained, even though he couldn't choose anything about his external reality, his mind could be free. That between what his master did to him and how he responded internally, between the blow he received and the judgment he made about that blow, there was a space, a small space, yes. A space constantly threatened by pain and humiliation, yes. A space that would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But a real space, concrete, inviolable. And in that space, in those millimeters of inner freedom that no chain could reach, lived the only freedom that matters. The freedom to choose his thoughts, his judgments, his internal responses to what happened to him. The freedom that his master, with all his power over Epictetus's body, could not touch. When he was physically free, he dedicated his life to teaching this, to showing men who were legally free but internally enslaved that true freedom doesn't live in external circumstances, but in the capacity to choose how you respond to those circumstances. That you can live in a palace and be a slave to your anger. That you can have all the power in the world and be a prisoner of your anxiety. That genuine freedom, the kind no government, no tyrant, no circumstance can strip from you, lives in that space between stimulus and response. Marcus Aurelius cultivated that space his entire life. Every entry in his meditations is an exercise in expanding that space. Every time he stopped to write before reacting, he was inserting an interval between the event and his response. He was widening the space, making room for evaluation, for rational judgment, for conscious choice, not because he was naturally calm, because he trained himself to be. Because he understood that this space was the ground where it was decided whether he would be a good emperor or a tyrant, a good human being or a reactive animal wearing a crown. Seneca described this space with a metaphor that is perfect for understanding it. He said that when the first impression arrives, the first wave of emotion, you have no control over it. It shows up. It hits you. It's involuntary, like the first shiver when you're startled, like the tears that come before you can stop them. That's nature. That's biology. You're not responsible for that first impression. But after that first wave, there is a moment where you can give your assent to that impression, accept it as truth, and act accordingly, or you can examine it, question it, and consciously decide whether it deserves your obedience. That moment is the space, and widening that moment, stretching it from a millisecond to a second, from a second to 5, from 5 to 30, is the most important practice you can develop as a human being. Because in those gained seconds lies the difference between the reaction that destroys and the response that builds, between the word you can't take back and the word that heals, between the impulsive decision that costs you years and the deliberate decision that benefits you for decades. Think about the last fight you had with someone you care about. Now, think about the exact moment where everything went off the rails. There was an instant, a precise instant, where you felt the emotion and had, for a fraction of a second, the possibility of choosing a different response, the possibility of not saying that word, of not using that tone, of not making that gesture. That instant existed, but it was so small, so compressed, so microscopic that you couldn't seize it. The automatic reaction was faster than your awareness. The closed circuit fired before the space could open. That's what we're going to change. Not overnight, not tomorrow, with practice, with repetition, with the same discipline Marcus Aurelius applied for decades. You are going to widen that space millimeter by millimeter until it's big enough for your awareness to step inside, look around, and choose. There's a technique the Stoics used that modern science has confirmed as extraordinarily effective. It's called the Stoic pause. And it's so simple, your mind is going to want to dismiss it as insufficient. Don't dismiss it. Its power isn't in its complexity, but in its consistent practice. The technique is this. When you feel an intense emotion taking over, before you do or say anything, take one breath. One single deep, slow breath. Inhale, counting to 4. Exhale, counting to 6. That's it. One breath, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, 10 seconds total. Those 10 seconds are your space. Those 10 seconds are the difference between the automatic reaction and the chosen response. Those 10 seconds are the border between emotional slavery and freedom. Not because 10 seconds are magic, because 10 seconds are enough for your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought and decision-making, to come online. When emotion hits you, the amygdala, the primitive part of your brain that handles emergency responses, fires first. It's faster. It's older, evolutionarily. And it's the one that produces the automatic reaction. But the prefrontal cortex needs a few more seconds to activate, and when it does, it can modulate the amygdala's response. It can evaluate. It can choose. It can tell the amygdala received, but I'll handle the response from here. Your assignment for this lesson is to practice the Stoic pause in the next 24 hours. Not in extreme situations, in everyday ones. Someone interrupts you. Pause, breathe, respond. Traffic frustrates you. Pause, breathe, choose. A text message irritates you. Pause, breathe. Before you type the reply your amygdala wants to send, let your prefrontal cortex review it. Every time you practice this pause, you are widening the space. You are building the most important muscle you can develop as a human being, the muscle of conscious choice, the muscle that separates the person who reacts from the person who responds, the muscle that turns prison into freedom, 10 seconds at a time. Sixth Stoic lesson. Seneca wrote that anger is a brief madness, and you've made decisions in those moments of madness that cost you years to repair. Brief madness. 2 words Seneca chose with surgical precision to describe exactly what anger does to your brain. He didn't say anger is an annoyance. He didn't say it's a discomfort. He didn't say it's a minor problem. He said madness, insanity, the same word used to describe people who had lost contact with reality, who could no longer distinguish true from false, who acted from a distorted version of the world that existed only inside their sick minds. That's what anger does. It makes you temporarily insane, not as a metaphor, as a precise description of what happens in your neurology when anger takes over. Your perception distorts. Your ability to evaluate consequences shuts down. Your empathy vanishes. Your vision narrows until the only thing you can see is the object of your fury, and the only thing you can conceive of is the destruction of that object. Everything else, the people who might be affected, the long-term consequences, the disproportion of your reaction, the possibility that you're wrong, all of it disappears from your field of vision. You are, literally, operating on a reduced and deformed version of reality. You are insane, briefly, but insane. And in those moments of brief madness, you made decisions. Decisions you would never have made with a clear mind. Decisions that contradicted your values, your intentions, your promises, the best version of yourself. Decisions that, when the madness passed, when the anger faded and sanity returned, left you staring at the wreckage of something you built over months or years and destroyed in 30 seconds of temporary insanity. I need you to think about the most costly decisions of your life. Not all of them, the ones that caused the most damage, the ones that were hardest to repair. The ones that changed trajectories, broke relationships, closed doors that never opened again. Now ask yourself, how many of those decisions were made in a state of calm reflection? And how many were made in a moment of brief madness, in an emotional outburst where anger or frustration or wounded pride was running the show? If you're honest, the answer is going to reveal something terrifying. The most destructive decisions of your life were not decisions. They were reactions. They were acts of brief madness that you executed at a speed that allowed no evaluation, no pause, no opportunity for the rational part of your brain to intervene before the damage was done. You didn't choose those decisions. They were ripped from you by an emotion that hijacked your ability to choose for the seconds or minutes it needed to cause maximum damage. Seneca observed this pattern in the most powerful men of his era and documented it with a meticulousness that shows how deeply it concerned him. He described men whose faces physically transformed during anger: bloodshot eyes, trembling lips, clenched teeth, swollen veins in the neck, hands twisted into fists. He said that if we could see ourselves in a mirror at the exact moment of anger, the shame of our own appearance would be enough to stop us. Because anger doesn't just deform judgment, it deforms the body. It turns you, physically, into something you wouldn't recognize as yourself if you could see it from the outside. And the most devastating part of Seneca's observation is what comes after the brief madness, the awakening, the moment where the anger recedes like a toxic tide, and what's left in plain sight is the damage. The words you said, the decisions you made, the relationships you damaged, the bridges you burned, all of it visible now under the light of recovered sanity. And in that moment, the anger no longer feels powerful. It feels like what it always was, a temporary disease that made you act against your own interests while convincing you that you were defending them. There's a pattern that repeats in the life of every person who hasn't mastered their anger, a cycle as predictable as it is destructive. First, the provocation. Something happens that activates the anger. Second, the escalation. The anger grows, feeds on itself, distorts perception, shuts down reason. Third, the explosion. The disproportionate reaction that causes the damage. Fourth, the regret. Sanity returns, and with it, the awareness of what you did. Fifth, the repair. Weeks, months, sometimes years trying to rebuild what you destroyed in minutes. Sixth, the promise. Never again. Next time I'll control myself. And seventh, the repetition. The next provocation arrives, and the cycle starts all over again, exactly the same, as if the promise had never been made. That cycle has stolen years of your life, not in the abstract, not as a figure of speech. In real, measurable, concrete time, dedicated to repairing damage you never had to cause if you'd had the ability to delay your reaction by 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's all it would have taken for the madness to pass and reason to intervene. 30 seconds you didn't give yourself because anger doesn't negotiate timelines, doesn't ask permission, doesn't wait until you're ready. It acts, and you deal with the consequences. Think about how many hours, how many days, how many weeks you've spent apologizing after an explosion, rebuilding trust that shattered in an instant, managing the professional, family, and social fallout of decisions made in states of brief madness. Think about how much emotional energy you've burned on the regret that follows every explosion, on the sleepless nights replaying what you said, on the shame of remembering your own face contorted by fury. Think about the relationships that were damaged in a way no apology can reach, because the damage from the brief madness was too deep, too personal, too surgically cruel for words of repair to erase. There are things you say in 30 seconds of anger that the other person remembers for 30 years. And you know this because you also remember things that were said to you in someone else's moments of anger that still hurt like the first day. Seneca proposed something radical to break this cycle. He didn't ask you to eliminate anger. He knew the first emotional wave is involuntary and can't be avoided. What he asked was to intervene before the escalation. Before the anger grew from a spark into a fire, before the madness settled in, at the precise moment where the emotion appears but hasn't yet taken full control. His technique was deliberate delay. When you feel the first spark of anger, he said, don't act, don't speak, don't make any decisions. Wait, not because waiting is comfortable, because waiting is the only way to prevent the brief madness from becoming lasting damage. He said the best remedy for anger is delay. That if you give the first wave time to pass, what remains afterward is not anger, but information you can process rationally. It's not suppression. It's not swallowing it. It's not pretending you feel nothing. It's delaying the action until the madness passes and sanity can step in. It's giving your prefrontal cortex time to do its job before the amygdala causes irreparable harm. It's inserting time between the spark and the fire, because the spark alone destroys nothing. What destroys is the fire you allow to grow when you don't stop the escalation in time. Your assignment for this lesson is to do a damage inventory, not to punish yourself. So you can see clearly how much the brief madness has cost you, and so that clarity gives you the motivation you need to practice deliberate delay. I want you to write down 3 decisions you made in moments of anger that cost you significantly. For each one, write 3 things. What you did in the moment of madness, what consequences it had, and how long it took you to repair the damage if you were able to repair it at all. When you see those 3 cases written in front of you, when you see the pattern with your own eyes, the next time anger shows up, you're going to remember this inventory. And that memory, that awareness of what brief madness has cost you in the past, can be the brake you need to delay your reaction long enough for sanity to arrive before the damage does. It's not a perfect technique. It's not a magic cure. But it's infinitely better than what you've been doing until now, which is letting the madness run unchecked and then wondering, surrounded by wreckage you created yourself, why your life feels like a permanent battlefield. Seventh Stoic lesson. Mastering your emotions is not suppressing them or ignoring them. It's feeling them fully without letting them decide for you. There's a misunderstanding about Stoicism that I need to destroy right now, because if I don't, everything we've worked on in this episode could turn toxic instead of liberating. The misunderstanding is this: that being stoic means not feeling, that mastering emotions means shutting them off, that the ideal is to become a rock, a machine, an emotionless being who moves through life like an efficient but empty robot. That is not Stoicism. That is emotional dissociation. And emotional dissociation is not mastery. It's another form of slavery. The slavery of repression, which is just as destructive as the slavery of impulsive reaction. It just destroys in different, quieter ways. If you've been listening to this episode thinking, I need to stop feeling, I need to shut down my emotions, I need to become a stone that nothing affects, stop. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what the Stoics taught. And that's not what you're going to practice. What you're going to practice is something infinitely more sophisticated and more difficult than repression. You're going to practice feeling fully without what you feel automatically determining what you do. That distinction is crucial, and you need to understand it at the deepest possible level. Feeling fully means allowing the emotion to exist inside you without denying it, without judging it, without being ashamed of it, without trying to make it disappear. It means that when anger shows up, you feel it. You feel the heat, you feel the tension, you feel the energy surging through your body. You don't deny it, you don't pretend it isn't there. You don't shove it under the emotional rug where you've been hiding everything you don't want to feel for decades. Without letting them decide for you means that after feeling all of that, after allowing the emotion to exist in its full intensity inside you, you choose what to do with it, not it, you. The emotion informs you. You decide. The emotion gives you data about what's happening. You process that data and make a conscious decision about the best response. The difference between repression and mastery is the difference between forcing a lid onto a boiling pot and adjusting the flame heating the pot. Repression is the lid. Everything keeps boiling inside. The pressure builds, the pot rattles, it hisses, and eventually, inevitably, the lid blows off. And when it does, the explosion is worse, far worse, than if you'd never put it on. Because it's not just the steam from this moment, it's the accumulated steam of weeks, months, years of denied emotions, of swallowed frustrations, of pain you forced under a lid that was never designed to hold that much pressure. You know this phenomenon. You've lived it. You've seen it in yourself with a clarity that shames you to remember. You repressed and repressed and repressed, convincing yourself you were strong, that you had control, that you were a man who doesn't let anything get to him. And one day, over something absolutely insignificant, a spilled glass, an innocent question, a minor setback you would have handled without issue any other time, you erupted. You erupted with a force that scared the people around you. That scared you. A force that had absolutely nothing to do with the trigger of the moment. You didn't explode because of the insignificant thing. You exploded because of everything that had been building under the lid the entire time you were being strong. Everything you repressed, everything you denied, everything you swallowed. Everything you shoved under the emotional rug came out all at once, warped by the pressure of time, amplified by the accumulation, transformed into something monstrous that bore no resemblance to what you would have expressed if you had processed each emotion when it originally appeared, instead of storing it until the reservoir burst. Mastery is adjusting the flame, not turning off the stove, because you need the stove. Emotions are the stove. They're the energy source that lets you connect with others, feel passion for what you do, experience joy, feel love, sense injustice. Without emotions, you're not strong, you're hollow, a functional shell that can execute tasks but can't truly live. Emotions are not the enemy. The lack of regulation is the enemy. Adjusting the flame means feeling anger without letting it consume you, feeling sadness without letting it paralyze you for weeks, feeling fear without letting it make the decisions, feeling frustration without letting it make you abandon what you're building. It's keeping the emotion at a temperature that's useful without being destructive. That informs without governing. That gives energy without burning everything down. Marcus Aurelius was not a man without emotions. He was a deeply emotional man who chose not to be governed by his emotions. There's a massive difference. If you read the Meditations carefully, you see a man who felt pain, who felt frustration, who felt exhaustion, who felt anger, who felt grief over the loss of his children, who felt the loneliness of power. He was not a stone. He was a complete human being who experienced the full emotional spectrum, but who had learned, through decades of practice, to feel all of it without all of it controlling him, to use each emotion as information for making better decisions, instead of letting each emotion make the decisions for him. Epictetus taught that emotions are like visitors who come to your door. You can't stop them from knocking. That's out of your control. What you can control is whether you open the door, whether you invite them to sit down, whether you hand them the keys to your house and let them rearrange the furniture however they please. An emotion that arrives and is met with awareness, observed without judgment, and processed with maturity is a temporary visitor who leaves useful information and goes. An emotion that arrives and is obeyed without question is an intruder who takes over your house and doesn't leave until it's destroyed something. And an emotion that arrives and is repressed, denied, shoved back out with force is a visitor you slammed the door on but who didn't leave. They stayed outside, waiting, building resentment. And the next time they knock, they're not going to knock politely. They're going to kick the door down. The practice of emotional mastery has 3 steps you need to integrate into your daily life. They're not complicated, but they require a constant attention that will feel exhausting at first and will become natural over time. Step 1. Recognize. When an emotion appears, name it. What I'm feeling is anger. This is sadness. This is anxiety. You already practiced this in the first lesson. Keep doing it. It's the foundation of everything. Step 2. Allow. Let the emotion exist. Don't repress it. Don't judge it. Don't tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this. You should. It's information. It's your nervous system doing its job. Allow it. Feel it. Give it space inside you to exist without shame or resistance. Step 3. Choose. After recognizing and allowing, choose your response. Not the response the emotion automatically suggests. The response the person you're building would give in this situation. The response that, when you look at it tomorrow with a clear mind, will make you feel proud instead of ashamed. Recognize, allow, choose. 3 words, 3 steps, a different life. Your assignment for this lesson is to practice the 3 steps in a real situation in the next 24 hours. You don't need to seek out an extreme situation. Life is going to hand you opportunities. Traffic, a comment you don't like, frustrating news, a plan that changes without warning. Any of those everyday situations is a perfect training ground. When the situation shows up, apply the 3 steps consciously. Recognize, I'm feeling frustration. Allow, it's valid to feel frustration. This didn't go the way I expected. Choose, what response do I want to give? What would the person I'm building do? And afterward, When the situation has passed, write down what happened, what you felt, what you chose to do instead of what you would have done automatically, and how it felt to choose instead of react. That feeling, the feeling of having felt an intense emotion in its full force, and having consciously chosen your response instead of being swept away by the impulse like a leaf in the wind, is the feeling of mastery. It's not the absence of emotion. It's not the emptiness of someone who feels nothing. It's the presence of choice in the middle of the emotional storm. And that presence, that ability to choose when everything inside you is pushing you to react, changes absolutely everything. Your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others, your relationship with life. 8th Stoic lesson. Every time someone knocks you off balance with a word or a gesture, you're handing the controls of your life to someone who doesn't deserve them. I want you to think about the last time someone got under your skin. Not an extreme situation, an everyday one. A comment, a tone of voice, a gesture, a look. Something someone did or said that made you lose your composure, your focus, the inner peace you'd managed to hold on to until that moment. Something that shifted your mood for the rest of the day. That made you ruminate for hours. That lodged in your head like a parasite and wouldn't let you go. Now I want you to see that situation from a perspective you've probably never considered. What happened in that moment, what really happened, beyond what you felt, is that you handed control of your internal state to another person. That person, with a word, with a gesture, with something they probably don't even remember saying or doing, took command of your emotional state. They decided how you were going to feel. They decided what you were going to think about for the next several hours. They decided the quality of your afternoon, your evening, your sleep, your interactions with the people who actually matter to you. That person became, temporarily, the pilot of your emotional life, and you allowed it. Without negotiation, without conscious consent, without even realizing what was happening. You handed the keys to your interior to someone who didn't ask for them, who didn't deserve them, who probably didn't even know they had them. And that person drove your emotional state wherever they pleased, while you rode passenger in your own body, watching your mood deteriorate, watching your peace disappear, watching your energy drain into ruminating over something that, if you evaluate it coldly, probably didn't deserve more than 30 seconds of your attention. That's what you do every time you let someone knock you off balance. You hand over the controls. You become someone else's emotional puppet. And the most absurd part is that many times that person didn't even intend to affect you. Sometimes it's a stranger in traffic you'll never see again. Sometimes it's a coworker who said something without thinking. Sometimes it's a comment on social media from someone you don't know and will never know. And you give that person, that stranger, that irrelevant figure in your life, the power to determine how you feel for hours. Hours of your finite, unrecoverable life spent reacting to someone who doesn't deserve a single minute of your emotional attention. Epictetus had savage clarity about this. He said, "If someone handed your body over to a stranger on the street, you'd be furious. But you hand your mind over to anyone who insults you and let them disturb it. Doesn't that shame you?" Read that again. Read it slowly. Let it land. If someone grabbed your arm and gave it to a stranger, you'd fight. If someone took your wallet and handed it to a passerby, you'd react. But when someone takes your peace of mind, your emotional stability, your focus, your energy, and hands them to the first provocateur who walks by you, don't just allow it, you do it yourself. You are the one who hands your mind to whoever insults you. Nobody forces you. You do it voluntarily every time you give another person the power to determine your internal state. Marcus Aurelius wrote constant reminders about this in his meditations. He told himself that the best revenge against someone who has wronged you is not becoming someone like them, that allowing someone else's cruelty to knock you off center is giving that cruelty a victory it didn't earn, that the person who provokes you only has power over you if you grant it, and that the most radical way to strip a provocateur of their power is to choose not to react, not out of passivity, out of sovereignty, because your internal state belongs to you and no one else, and it's not for sale or for rent to the first person who decides to test you. There's something you need to understand about the people who provoke you. Most of the time, the provocation has nothing to do with you. It has to do with them. The person who insults you is acting from their own pain, their own frustration, their own inability to master their emotions. They're projecting their internal chaos onto you. And when you react, when you take the bait, when you let their chaos become your chaos, you're absorbing someone else's emotional garbage and making it yours. You're taking another person's problem and stuffing it inside yourself as if it were your responsibility to carry. Seneca illustrated this with a powerful image you need to tattoo on your mind. He said that another person's anger directed at you is like a poisoned gift. Someone holds out a box. The box looks normal. It looks like a legitimate present, but inside there's poison. If you accept it, if you take it, if you open it and let it into your system, it poisons you. The poison does its work. It destroys you from the inside, while the person who gave it walks away whistling. But if you don't accept it, if you look at the box and choose not to take it, if you say, "No, this doesn't belong to me, this is yours," the poison stays with the person who offered it. The insult, the provocation, the hurtful comment, the contemptuous look, the condescending tone, all of it is the poisoned gift. And you have the option, every time, in every interaction, to accept it or not. If you react, you accepted it. The poison is inside you now, circulating through your system, doing its destructive work on your mood, your energy, your peace, your ability to function well for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, the person who offered it goes on with their life, probably without even remembering what they said, probably without knowing they caused any damage, probably repeating the same pattern with the next person who crosses their path. If you don't react, if you consciously choose not to accept the poisoned gift, the poison stays with its owner, and you go on with your life intact, your peace preserved, your energy available for the things and the people that actually deserve your emotional attention. The remote control image we mentioned in the lesson about anger is relevant again here, but expanded. It's not just your anger you're handing over, it's your entire emotional spectrum. You give other people the power to make you feel insecure with a look, anxious with a comment, sad with a criticism, angry with a tone of voice, jealous with a social media post, inadequate with a comparison. Every single one of those reactions is a surrender of power. Every single one is a, "Here you go, you control how I feel, you decide whether I have a good day or a miserable one." How many people are holding a remote control with your name on it right now? How many people, some of whom you don't even care about, have the ability to alter your emotional state with a minimal gesture? If the answer is more than zero, those people have more power over your inner life than they should. And you didn't give them that power consciously. You handed it over one automatic reaction at a time, every time you allowed an external stimulus to determine your internal state without passing through the filter of your awareness. Reclaiming that power is the most important work you can do for yourself. And it's reclaimed in a way that's simple in concept and demanding in practice, by stopping the automatic reactions to what others do and say, and inserting your awareness, your judgment, your choice, between the external stimulus and your internal response. Every time someone tries to knock you off balance and you choose not to lose your balance, you reclaim a remote control. Every time someone tries to hand you a poisoned gift and you choose not to accept it, you keep your peace intact. Every time someone tries to pilot your emotional state and you choose to keep your hands on the wheel, you reaffirm that your interior belongs to you and no one else. Your assignment for this lesson is to reclaim one specific remote control. I want you to identify the person who most consistently has the ability to alter your emotional state. It can be someone close or someone peripheral. What matters is that it's someone whose words or actions affect you disproportionately. Write down that person's name, and beneath it, write exactly what power you've given them. I've given them the power to make me feel with just. Be specific. I've given them the power to ruin my day with a condescending tone of voice. I've given them the power to make me feel inadequate with a comparison to others. Now read what you wrote and ask yourself, does this person deserve that power? Would you consciously hand them the key to your emotional state if they asked for it? The answer is no. You would never give it consciously, but you gave it unconsciously, reaction after reaction, for years. Today, the process of reclaiming it begins, not all at once, but with every interaction where you choose your response. Instead of allowing that person to choose it for you, you're pulling a little more power out of their hands and returning it to yours, where it always belonged. Ninth Stoic lesson. Epictetus taught that it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them, and you keep blaming the world for what happens inside you. This is Epictetus's most famous teaching, the one that opens his handbook, the one that condenses the entire essence of Stoicism and inner mastery into a single sentence. And it's the one that's going to be hardest for you to accept, because it directly contradicts the way you've interpreted your entire life. It is not things that disturb you, it is your judgments about things. Your first reaction to hearing this is going to be rejection. Of course it's things. Of course it's what happens to me. If my boss yells at me, that upsets me. If my partner ignores me, that hurts. If I lose money, that frustrates me. It's things, it's events, it's circumstances, not my judgments. That's going to be your reaction. And that reaction is exactly the proof of what Epictetus was pointing out. Because if it were things that disturb you, if the external event directly produced the emotion, then every person should have the same reaction to the same event. If your boss yelling is inherently disturbing, then everyone who gets yelled at should be disturbed in the same way and to the same degree. But that's not how it works. There are people who get yelled at by their boss and process it calmly. He's having a bad day. His yelling says more about him than about me. I'm going to do my job and let it pass. There are other people who receive the same yelling and emotionally collapse for days. Same event, radically different responses. Why? Because the event doesn't produce the emotion. The interpretation of the event produces the emotion. The judgment produces the emotion. The story you tell yourself about what happened produces the emotion. Your boss yells at you. That's a fact. A neutral event in itself. Sound waves at elevated volume coming out of another person's mouth. What disturbs you isn't the yelling. It's your judgment about the yelling. He's disrespecting me. He doesn't value my work. I'm a failure if my boss is yelling at me. I should stand up for myself or I'm a coward. This is unfair and shouldn't be happening. Each of those judgments is an interpretation your mind adds to the event. And it's the interpretation, not the event, that produces the emotion. The event is the yelling. Your judgment is, he's disrespecting me. And the emotion you feel, the anger, the humiliation, the frustration doesn't come from the yelling. It comes from the judgment. This doesn't mean the yelling is okay. It doesn't mean you should accept mistreatment. It doesn't mean your boss has the right to yell at you. It means your emotional reaction is not determined by what he does. It's determined by what you think about what he does. And that distinction, which seems subtle but is monumental, gives you something you didn't have before: options. If the emotion comes directly from the event, you have no options. The event happens, and the emotion hits you inevitably. But if the emotion comes from your judgment about the event, then you have options. You can examine the judgment. You can question it. You can modify it. You can choose a different interpretation that produces a different emotion that leads to a different response. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. Changing automatic judgments you've been repeating for decades is one of the hardest things you can do as a human being. But it's possible. And it's the difference between being a slave to your reactions and being the architect of your responses. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. When something happened to him, before reacting, he would ask himself, "What judgment am I making about this? Is that judgment necessarily true? Is there another way to interpret what's happening?" Those questions were his tool for separating the event from the judgment, for seeing the bare fact before dressing it in emotional interpretation. And in doing so, he created space to choose a response based on reality rather than on the story his mind was telling him about reality. He wrote something that captures this perfectly. Remove your judgment about the event, and the harm disappears. He didn't say the event disappears. The boss's yelling is still yelling. The betrayal is still a betrayal. The loss is still a loss. But the emotional damage, the disturbance that steals your peace, the disproportionate reaction that drives you toward destructive decisions, that comes from the judgment. And if you change the judgment, you change the damage. Think about how many times you've been disturbed by something that, seen from another angle, didn't deserve the disturbance you gave it. How many sleepless nights over a comment the other person probably doesn't even remember. How many fights over interpretations that turned out to be wrong. How many impulsive decisions based on judgments that, when calm returned, you discovered were distorted by the emotion of the moment. In every one of those cases, it wasn't the event that wrecked you. It was your judgment about the event. And if you'd had the ability to question that judgment before obeying it, the outcome would have been radically different. Epictetus taught his students to do something he called the examination of impressions. When an impression arrived, when an event triggered an automatic judgment and an emotion, he instructed them not to accept that impression without questioning it, to stop it at the door of the mind and ask, "Are you true? Are you what you claim to be? Or are you a distortion produced by my fear, my insecurity, my pride, my personal history?" That examination is the most advanced practice of inner mastery, because it doesn't just give you control over your response to the event, it gives you control over the emotion itself. If you can examine the judgment that produces the emotion and discover that the judgment is false or exaggerated, the emotion naturally diminishes, not through repression, through correction. It's like correcting a lens prescription. You were seeing blurry, not because reality was blurry, because your lenses were miscalibrated. When you correct the lenses, the same reality looks completely different. Clearer, more manageable, less terrifying. And your emotional response changes because what you're seeing is no longer the distorted version, but the real one. You've spent your whole life blaming the world for what happens inside you. My boss makes me angry. My partner makes me feel insecure. Traffic stresses me out. The news depresses me. In every one of those sentences, the grammatical structure reveals the error. You're placing the cause of your emotion outside yourself, in your boss, in your partner, in traffic, in the news, as if they had direct control over what you feel, as if your emotional state were an inevitable result of what happens around you. But Epictetus would tell you to rewrite those sentences. When my boss yells, I choose the judgment that produces my anger. When my partner acts a certain way, I choose the interpretation that produces my insecurity. When traffic stops, I choose the narrative that produces my stress. In each rewritten sentence, the responsibility returns to you. Not the blame, the responsibility. You're not to blame for what you feel automatically. You are responsible for what you do with what you feel. And that responsibility is power. It's the difference between the world makes me feel bad and I choose how I respond to the world. Your assignment for this lesson is to practice the examination of impressions. The next time an event triggers an intense emotional reaction, before you act, quickly write down 3 things. You don't need a notebook. Use your phone. Use a napkin. Whatever you have on hand. First, the bare fact. Just what happened. No interpretation. No emotional adjectives. My boss spoke loudly during the meeting. Not, my boss yelled at me disrespectfully in front of everyone. Second, your automatic judgment about the fact. The interpretation your mind generated instantly. He's disrespecting me. He doesn't value my work. Everyone saw me as a failure. Third, an alternative judgment that is at least equally valid. He's under pressure and doesn't handle his stress well. His volume doesn't define my professional worth. Probably nobody noticed as much as I think. When you see the automatic judgment and the alternative judgment side by side, something happens inside you. The absolute certainty of the automatic judgment cracks. It's no longer the only possible interpretation. There are other ways to see what happened. And in that crack, in that opening to a possibility that was previously invisible, the emotion loses part of its force. Not all of it, part. But that part can be exactly the difference between a destructive reaction you regret tomorrow and a constructive response you're proud of. That is the power of the examination of impressions. That is the most valuable legacy Epictetus left you. 10th Stoic lesson. Today you can start responding instead of reacting, and that small change will transform every area of your life. We've arrived at the final lesson of this episode, and I want you to understand something before I give you the final assignment. Everything we've worked on today, the 9 previous lessons, the concepts, the techniques, the assignments, all of it comes down to a single distinction. A distinction that, if you internalize it, if you turn it into the lens through which you see every situation in your life, will produce a change that extends to absolutely everything you do and everything you are. The distinction is between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic. It requires no awareness, no choice, no pause. It's the closed circuit where the stimulus directly produces a behavior without passing through any filter. It's the animal that flees or attacks on instinct. It's the machine executing its program. It's the version of you that you've been until today. Someone whose behaviors are determined by external stimuli over which they have no control. Responding is conscious. It requires presence. It requires the space Epictetus described. It requires the pause you practiced. It requires the examination of judgments. It requires the deliberate decision to choose a behavior instead of letting one happen by default. It is the human being at their highest expression, someone who feels everything but chooses what to do with what they feel. Someone who receives the stimulus, processes it through awareness, evaluates their options, and acts from clarity instead of impulse. The difference between these two ways of existing is the difference between a life that happens to you and a life you build. When you react, life is happening to you. Circumstances move you, emotions control you, people manipulate you effortlessly. You're a leaf carried by the emotional wind, going wherever the wind takes you, with no direction of your own, no ability to choose your course. When you respond, you are building your life. Circumstances happen, yes, but you choose how to face them. Emotions arise, yes, but you decide what to do with them. People act, yes, but you keep your hands on the wheel of your internal state, regardless of what others do. This shift from reacting to responding is not dramatic in its execution. It doesn't require a spectacular overnight transformation. It requires something far more modest, but infinitely harder. Consciously choosing your response once, then again, then once more, situation by situation, moment by moment, emotion by emotion. Every time you choose to respond instead of react, you're strengthening a muscle that, like all muscles, starts weak and grows stronger with use. At first it's going to be clumsy. You're going to fail more often than you succeed. You're going to react automatically and realize afterward that you could have responded. You're going to feel frustrated with yourself for not applying the pause, for not examining the judgment, for not choosing consciously. And that's fine. Marcus Aurelius failed too. Every night in his meditations, he noted the moments where he'd lost control. Not because he was a failure, because he was a practitioner. And practice means failing, correcting, and trying again. The key is not perfection, it's direction. You don't need to respond perfectly to every stimulus starting today. You need to respond consciously one more time than you would have yesterday. One additional moment of awareness, one more instant of pause, one more situation where you choose instead of react. That's progress, that's growth, that's inner mastery under construction. And the effects of that change, however small it seems in each individual moment, compound in a way that's hard to believe until you experience it firsthand. Because when you respond instead of react in your relationship, even just once, the communication improves by 1 degree. When communication improves, trust grows by 1 degree. When trust grows, intimacy deepens by 1 degree. When intimacy deepens, the relationship transforms, not all at once. Degree by degree, conversation by conversation. Chosen response by chosen response. All of it from a single change repeated with consistency, choosing your response instead of obeying your reaction. When you respond instead of react at work, your decisions improve. You stop making impulsive decisions that cost you weeks to repair. You stop burning bridges with colleagues over disproportionate reactions. You stop sabotaging your own career with emotional outbursts that demonstrate exactly the opposite of what you're trying to prove. When decisions improve, results change. When results change, opportunities appear. When opportunities appear, the career transforms. All from the same microscopic change applied over and over. When you respond instead of react with yourself, the relationship with your inner world transforms in a way that affects absolutely everything else. You stop being the enemy of your emotions and become their manager. You stop fearing them and start using them. You stop repressing them and start integrating them. And from that integration, from that inner peace, that is not the absence of emotion, but the presence of mastery, everything else reconfigures. Your health, your energy, your sleep, your ability to enjoy simple things, your ability to be present with the people you love, instead of being hijacked by emotions that pull you away from them. The Stoics didn't promise a life without suffering. They promised something better, a life where suffering doesn't get the last word, where emotions inform but don't govern, where circumstances challenge but don't determine, where you, with all your imperfection, with your entire history of reactivity, with all the years you spent obeying impulses without questioning them, have the ability to choose, to pause, to examine, to decide, and to act from the best version of yourself instead of the most primitive. That ability was always inside you. It's not something you need to acquire from the outside. It's not something a book can hand you or a podcast can install. It's something you need to unearth. It's buried beneath the layers of automatic reactivity you've accumulated over decades of living on emotional autopilot, beneath the patterns you inherited without questioning, beneath the emotional habits you formed without awareness. Beneath all of that, there is a human being who can choose, who could always choose, who simply didn't know the choice existed because nobody pointed out the space between the stimulus and the response. Today I pointed out that space. Now you know it exists. And now that you know, you can't pretend you don't. Every time you react automatically from this point forward, there will be a voice inside you that says, you could have chosen. And that voice, far from being a punishment, is the beginning of transformation. It's awareness waking up. It's the captain taking the wheel. It's the start of the inner mastery that will change the way you live every day for the rest of your life. Your final assignment for this episode is simple in form and profound in its implications. I want you to choose a single area of your life where reactivity has cost you the most. It could be your relationship. It could be your relationship with your kids. It could be your work. It could be your relationship with yourself. One single area, the one that has suffered the most damage from your inability to respond instead of react. And I want you to make a concrete, specific commitment for that area. Not, I'm going to be calmer. That's not a commitment. That's a wish. A commitment is, the next time my partner says something that triggers me, I'm going to do the 10-second stoic pause before I respond. Or, the next time my kid does something that frustrates me, I'm going to name the emotions silently before I act. Or, the next time I receive criticism at work, I'm going to examine my automatic judgment before I react. One commitment, one area, one specific practice. And when you follow through, when for the first time you choose your response in that area where you always reacted, you're going to feel something you haven't felt before. You're going to feel that you are the one holding the wheel, not your emotions, not the circumstances, not other people. You. And that feeling of sovereignty over your own interior is what the Stoics called the good life. Not a life without problems, a life where the problems don't rule you. A life where you choose, every day, every moment, every response. We've reached the end of episode 7, and what we did today is different from anything you've worked on in previous episodes. Because today we didn't work on your history, or your patterns, or your identity, or your plans. Today we worked on something deeper and more immediate than all of that. On the way you process every second of your life. On the internal mechanism that determines whether you build or destroy, whether you move forward or fall back, whether you live with intention or live on emotional autopilot. Let's walk through what we covered today. In the introduction, you understood that action without inner mastery is a race car with a drunk driver. That being in motion is essential, but that without emotional control, that motion can cause more damage than standing still. That the Stoics considered mastery of the inner world the most important skill in human existence, and that the inner citadel, that place of calm and clarity at the center of the storm, is something you'll build brick by brick. In the first Stoic lesson, you discovered the fundamental confusion that has ruled your life, believing your emotions are you and that obeying them is being authentic. You understood that emotions are data, not orders, that you are the captain, not the radar. And you began naming your emotions in silence to create the first distance between you and what you feel. In the second Stoic lesson, you saw that you live in permanent emergency mode, giving level 8 responses to level 3 situations. You understood the 3 levels of damage this produces: physical exhaustion, destruction of relationships, and catastrophic decisions, and you began calibrating your responses with the 1 to 10 scale. In the third Stoic lesson, Marcus Aurelius showed you that the most powerful man in the world considered his most important battle to be against his own thoughts, that his meditations were nightly rounds against his inner demons, that every night he reviewed, evaluated, and prepared to respond better the next day. And you adopted his nightly practice of 3 questions, where you reacted, what the person you're building would have done, and what you'll do tomorrow. In the fourth Stoic lesson, you confronted the truth about anger, that it feels like power, but turns you into a slave of anyone who knows how to push your buttons. That Seneca watched anger destroy the most powerful men in Rome. That the difference between anger and firmness is the difference between losing control and communicating a boundary with calm. And you identified your primary trigger to prepare an alternative response before the next storm arrives. In the fifth Stoic lesson, you discovered the space between stimulus and response, the single most important idea in Stoicism. That Epictetus found that space as a slave, and Marcus Aurelius cultivated it as an emperor. That the 10-second Stoic pause gives your prefrontal cortex the time it needs to intervene before the amygdala causes damage, and you began practicing that pause in everyday situations. In the sixth Stoic lesson, Seneca confronted you with brief madness, with the fact that the worst decisions of your life were not decisions but reactions made in states of temporary insanity, with the 7-step cycle that repeats every time anger isn't contained in time. And you created a damage inventory that showed you how much brief madness has cost you in real, concrete terms. In the 7th Stoic lesson, you destroyed the most dangerous misunderstanding about Stoicism, that mastering emotions means suppressing them. You understood that repression is the pressure cooker that eventually explodes, while mastery is adjusting the flame. That Marcus Aurelius was deeply emotional, but chose not to be governed by his emotions. And you learned the 3 steps of mastery: recognize, allow, and choose. In the 8th Stoic lesson, you saw that every time someone knocks you off balance, you're handing the controls of your life to someone who doesn't deserve them. That Epictetus rightly asked why you hand your mind to the first person who insults you when you'd never hand over your body. That Seneca described provocation as a poisoned gift that only harms you if you accept it. And you identified who holds your emotional remote control so you can begin reclaiming it. In the 9th Stoic lesson, Epictetus revealed that it is not things that disturb you, but your judgments about them. That the same situation produces different emotions in different people because interpretation, not the event, generates the emotion. That the examination of impressions lets you question your automatic judgments before obeying them. And you practiced separating the bare fact from the judgment and generating an alternative interpretation. And in the 10th Stoic lesson, you understood that it all comes down to one distinction: reacting versus responding. That reacting is the closed circuit of the animal. That responding is the conscious choice of the human being. That this change doesn't require perfection, it requires direction, and you committed to a specific practice in a specific area of your life where reactivity has cost you the most. If this episode changed your relationship with your emotions, if you felt that for the first time someone showed you that you can feel without obeying, that you can live intensely without being dragged by the intensity, drop this phrase in the comments. Today I stop reacting and start responding. Share this episode with someone who lives governed by their emotions, someone whose anger has cost them relationships, someone whose anxiety has stolen opportunities, someone who needs to hear that between what happens to them and how they respond, there is a space, and that in that space lives the freedom they've been looking for in the wrong place. And practice every day. The techniques in this episode don't work if you listen and file them away. They work if you practice them. The Stoic pause, the examination of impressions, the 3 steps of recognize, allow, and choose. Marcus Aurelius's nightly practice, the 1 to 10 scale. Practice 1. Practice all of them, but practice. Now, I need to prepare you for what's coming, because there's something inner mastery is going to reveal that you didn't expect. Something that's going to surface when the emotions stop making so much noise, and that's going to confront you in a way no previous episode has. The silence. When you master your emotions, when the internal noise dies down, when the automatic reactions stop consuming all your energy, what's left is silence. And in that silence you come face to face with yourself. No distractions, no emotional drama to use as an excuse not to look closely, no adrenaline from reactivity keeping you busy and giving you the illusion of being alive even as it was destroying you. And many people discover, to their absolute horror, that they don't know how to sit in that silence, that they don't know how to be alone with themselves without desperately searching for something to fill the void, that they've spent their entire lives running from solitude as if it were a predator, filling every moment with noise, with activity, with social media, with relationships they sometimes maintain just to avoid being alone, with anything, however shallow, that keeps them away from the terrifying and inevitable experience of being alone with who they really are, without the background noise that usually drowns everything out. Because when the noise stops, when the distractions vanish, when the emotional reactions stop consuming all your attention, what's left is you, just you, with your thoughts, with your truth, with the questions you've been avoiding, with the person you discovered in the mirror in episode 4, but haven't yet learned to inhabit in silence. Episode 8 is called, Until You Learn to Be Alone, You Won't Be Able to Be With Anyone, and it's going to teach you something the Stoics considered absolutely essential for anyone who aspires to a full and genuine life. Solitude as a tool of strength, not as the punishment society taught you to fear. Solitude as the laboratory where character is forged, character that no relationship, no social group, no external company can build for you. Solitude as the ultimate proof that you can be with yourself without needing to escape. You've mastered your interior. You have the wheel. Now you need to learn to navigate the deepest and most silent waters of all, the waters of your own company. This is Stoicism for winners. This is from lost to unstoppable. Today you learn to govern what you feel. Tomorrow you're going to learn to inhabit the silence that appears when you stop running from yourself. See you in episode 8, with the wheel in your hands, with your emotions informing instead of governing, and with the courage to face the solitude that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.